And just like any other morning for a bunch of Chilean miners. And they went down deep, deep underground as they normally did to do their mining. And that day did not end like any normal day for them because there was this huge landslip. And 33 miners were trapped 700 meters underground and 5 kilometers from the nearest exit. Now, at that point, the people above ground didn't know whether they were launching a rescue or a recovery. And so the families of these men kind of flooded into the area, and they built a tent city around the mine, and they held vigil, and they prayed, and they lamented, and they cried, and they spent time in silence, and they prayed, and they lamented, and they cried, and they spent time in silence, all just waiting for a moment of light, a moment of hope that would tell them whether their loved ones were still alive. 17 days later, test holes being drilled everywhere to try and get in, to try and see if there's any information that they can get, and then light. A note comes back up through one of these holes that says, "We are well, the 33 of us, we're in the refuge." Light had broken in. And then kind of swung into operation 3 different plans to try and get these guys out from underground because they had no idea kind of whether they were going to be able to get close. Like, how close were they going to be able to get? Were they going to disturb more earth when they did so? And so it took another 50 days before there was breakthrough. And they got near to where the guys were, and there was a specially designed capsule that would pull one person up at a time out of the darkness and into the light. But there was a catch. A rescuer had to prove that this thing worked and to ride the capsule down into the darkness in order to bring the miners back up into light and life. Those who were in darkness needed a visitor. They needed someone to come from the light and to step into their darkness. And Advent begins with one such visitor who comes to an elderly couple who are in a dark place to announce a much grander rescue that affects every human being that has ever existed and will ever exist. Now, this elderly couple, we're going to hear more about these in a few weeks' time. A couple called Zechariah and Elizabeth. Zechariah was a priest in the temple of God. They were a faithful couple, a super faithful couple. And yet they had reached their old age, and they were bearing the pain of childlessness. And not only were they bearing the pain of childlessness, but in their culture, that brought with it deep shame. And so this faithful couple were bearing the darkness, the hopelessness, and the shame. Well, one day Zechariah is kind of doing his priestly business in the temple, as he did, and he was met with this visitor, this angel. Came from on high. Now, you know when I say an angel came from on high, do you picture, like chubby little naked baby with wings, kind of Cupid style? And this chubby little baby turns up. And the thing is, if you do picture that, then get that out of your head. Because whenever you read in the Bible somebody who has an angelic encounter, they don't just go, "Oh, isn't that cute?" Instead, they soil themselves. They're terrified because what they encounter is a fearsome kind of warrior angel. And this warrior angel says, I got a message for you. And the message is that you're going to have a baby. Actually, no, it wasn't he's going to have a baby, because that would be a miracle too far. Your wife is going to have a baby. And Zechariah turns around and he says, "Well, how will this be?" And the angel says, well, it's going to happen, but because you didn't believe, you're going to be struck dumb, and you're not going to speak for the next 9 months. I mean, that must have been bliss for his wife. But he didn't get to speak then until the baby was born. When the baby was born, he writes on a tablet what the name of the baby is going to be, and as soon as he writes what the name of the baby is going to be, his tongue is loosed, and he gets to speak, and he is filled with the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit then speaks this prophecy through him, which is recorded for us in Luke chapter 1. And so if you've got a Bible, turn to Luke chapter 1, and verse 67 is where we're starting, because this song, this prophecy gets recorded for us. And his father, so this is John the Baptist we're talking about here. And his father Zechariah was filled with the Holy Spirit and prophesied, saying, "Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, for he has visited and redeemed his people, and has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David, as he spoke by the mouth of his holy prophets from of old, that we should be saved from our enemies, and from the hand of all who hate us, to show the mercy promised to our fathers, and to remember his holy covenant, the oath that he swore to our father Abraham to grant us, that we, being delivered from the hand of our enemies, might serve him without fear, in holiness and righteousness before him all our days. And you, child, will be called the prophet of the Most High, for you will go before the Lord to prepare his ways, to give knowledge of salvation to his people in the forgiveness of their sins, because of the tender mercy of our God, whereby the sunrise shall visit us from on high, and give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Now, this guy had just had his own baby, but he starts singing about another baby. Now, you think about, Tom and Ruth recently had Ephraim. You guys with Bess, imagine that, if shortly afterwards the fathers start singing about another baby, you'd think this is really weird. And yet he's just had his own baby and he's singing about another baby because he knows that his son is going to be the spokesperson for one that is far greater than the child that he's just had. And the song that he sings is about people that are trapped in darkness, but a rescuer is going to come and visit them and is going to bring them from darkness and death into light and life. And he's singing like his past tense. You look at all the past tenses in there. He has visited, he has redeemed, he has saved us from our enemies. Therefore, he's faithful to all of his promises. We are rescued. It's a song of liberation that if you read through the Old Testament, it's got so many of the kind of echoes of the Exodus where God's people are trapped in a situation under an enemy that is too powerful for them. And yet God is going to make a way. He's going to make a way to rescue them and to liberate them. And this is what Advent is pointing towards, this rescuer, this liberator. And where we're going to focus our attention this morning is on these verses here. I'm going to read them again because these are just beautiful. To give knowledge of salvation to his people in the forgiveness of their sins, because of the tender mercy of our God, whereby the sunrise shall visit us from on high, to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. Jesus has come to bring light to people in darkness and to bring people in darkness into the light. That's why he's come. And so bottom line is that this rescue is necessary because people are stuck in a deep, dark hole. And when you're in a deep, dark hole, what you need is a bright light. And that bright light comes because of the magnificent, glorious, unimaginable love of God. So first of all then, why is light such a big deal at Advent? I mean, you look around. I know we got these sort of schmancy, slightly bigger bulbs now, which makes it harder to see you people up there because I just have to kind of do this, When it was the fairy lights, it was much easier. So, it's good for my hamstrings and my quads. We've got the fairy lights over here. Then we've got candles. Why is it that whenever you get into Advent season, everybody starts sticking up as many lights as they possibly can? It's because at the heart of it, it speaks to people who are stuck down a deep, dark hole. Now, I apologize if you're triggered by that picture. It's meant to be kind of looking upwards. You're trapped down at the bottom, and so just imagine that that's what it is. And if it troubles you to imagine it, then don't imagine it, okay? Don't be triggered by it. But anyway, it's a deep, dark hole. And why are humans in a deep, dark hole? We were made to live in the light. We were made to live in the light of God's wisdom and to experience him sharing his life and his goodness with us. But the first humans and every human ever since has rejected God's goodness. We've said, we know better than you. And when we cut ourselves off from the source of life, what we experience is darkness and death. And we're not victims in this. In John chapter 3, shortly after the most famous verse in the Bible, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him would not perish, but would have eternal life. Shortly after that, Jesus says this. He says, light has come into the world, but people love darkness because their deeds were evil. Even the very best person in the world has got stuff that they want to hide. And so as well as imprisoning us, the darkness actually serves us because it means that we get to hide the stuff that we don't want other people to see. When Isaiah was prophesying about this rescuer, he described it like this. He says, people walking in darkness have seen a great light. Now, I understand that if you live in Merthyr with the street lamps the way that they are, that could describe most of us on most winter evenings, couldn't it? You know, the people walking in darkness. But he's not just talking about the absence of light. He's talking about people who have chosen. This walk is their set kind of trajectory, their set path of life. These people are choosing to walk in darkness. Zechariah takes it a step further. He says to shine on those living in darkness. You're not just walking it anymore. You've decided to sit down in it. You're abiding in the darkness. And so it's like these people have said, let's just stay in the mine forever. Now imagine that you're a rescuer going down the mine. And when you get down the mine, this didn't happen, by the way, just in case anybody goes away and tries to, Wikipedia this. This didn't happen. This is entirely fictional. Rescuer goes down the mine. And he finds that the people are kind of split into 4 groups. And over in the one corner, you've got these people who have reconciled themselves to living in the darkness. And they've decided that with self-improvement, with physical exercise and getting the gains and a good diet, they can tolerate life in the darkness. And so they've decided they're just going to stay there. Then you've got these people who, no, the darkness isn't real. As long as we meditate on the light, we're just going to sit and picture the light. If you can picture the light, we'll be fine. And then over in the other corner, you've got these people who've decided that they can work their way out of darkness. We're going to prove to the people up there that we can get out on our own merits. We've got hands full of toothpicks, and we are going to dig through rock, and we're going to get 700 meters up. We can prove it to them. And then you've got the people over in the other corner who now deny that the light ever even existed. They are embracing the darkness, and they're saying, we're going to stick it to those light people, and don't you judge me. And that might sound far-fetched and ridiculous. And yeah, I'm sure that for most of us, there's a little resonance with either our own experience or people that we know. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I think for a lot of my life, I've been, give me a toothpick. I'm going to prove to God that I can dig my way up to him. And yet it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous to believe that we can get our way out of the darkness. The reality is that we need someone to come and rescue us from this mine that is of our own making. But here's the good news. Jesus has come to bring light to people in darkness and to bring people in darkness into the light. That's what he's come to do. On the 9th of October, 50 days after this note came up out of the hole, there was a breakthrough. They got close to where the guys were. 3 days later, the first rescuer rode the capsule down into the darkness. This is what Zechariah says, whereby the sunrise shall visit us from on high. The rescuer that comes to rescue us isn't going to rescue us remotely. He isn't going to send down a rope and call us to climb it up. He's come down into the darkness. And he's not coming down in a capsule. He is the capsule. He is the rescue. Light is coming down into the darkness to give light to those who sit in darkness and the shadow of death, and to guide our feet into the way of peace. And when he talks about guiding our feet into the way of peace, it isn't the idea of the absence of conflict. Instead, this peace is wholeness. It's the restoration of everything that we were created to be and to experience. It's being brought back into full relationship with God, being brought into reconciled relationship to one another, and reconciled relationship to the creation. This is the making new of all things. So when he rescues us, when the sunrise comes down, he's coming down to bring us up into the light, to make us back into what we were created to be, and to prepare us for the new creation where everything is made new. This is good. And when you think about how light works, when you go to your front door on a dark evening like this, and because it's Merthyr, the street lights are not particularly good, so it's very dark. I'm sounding like I've got a bit of an issue. Well, maybe I do. Perhaps I need counseling. But you open your front door. It's dark in the street. Does the darkness outside then invade your home? No. Instead, the light that is in your home floods outwards onto the pavement, because that's the way that light works. Is there such a thing as... Somebody's got very strong feelings there. like me about streetlights in Merthyr. But is there such thing as a darkness torch? Which when you switch it on, like sends out a beam of darkness into the light? No, because that's not how light works. Light invades the darkness. It doesn't matter kind of how big that light source, how powerful that light source, the light invades the darkness, always. Now, you know the first rescuer that went down was a guy called Manuel Gonzalez, and he had a little head torch on. You imagine that's the first new source of light that they've had in 60 days, and he gets out the little capsule, boom, beam. You know, they're experiencing new light breaking into the darkness. And that's why we have the fairy lights there and the candles and these. But the issue is that, you know, when we start reducing Advent down to fairy lights and candles, we miss the point of what Zechariah is saying here. Because he isn't talking about candles and fairy lights. He's talking about something altogether more glorious. You know, when God began creation, what's the first thing that he speaks into creation? He says, "Let there be." Yes, and that light that he spoke into existence, do you think it was like that? I think it was like, boom! You know, there's not light, and then all of a sudden, light! And light just floods everything, and it pervades everything. Then think about the Advent story. The first appearance of light in the Advent story is a star. Now, I know that we look at the twinkle, twinkle, little star, but you're talking about a blazing ball of glory. Then the angels appear, and the shepherds go, "Oh, they're a bit bright, aren't they? You know, tinsely." No, the shepherds I was going to use a phrase there that I shouldn't use, but they were really scared. And they were scared because of the glory that had appeared. This is the kind of light we're talking about. And this sunrise that is going to come and visit from on high is no exception. And he is no pinprick of light. He's not even just bringing the light. He is the light. He is the sunrise. And you know, if you've ever been out before dawn, and it's like just before dawn, it seems to get like super dark. There's this really weird thing where it seems to get like super dark just before dawn. Then you get little hints of the sun just popping up over the horizon, and then it pops up, and you are blinded by the light. It's really bad if you're driving, and it's just glorious. And so this helps us to picture the kind of light that Jesus is. When Jesus steps in, he turns night to day. Those of you that listened to the Lectio kind of prayer this morning was talking about how Jesus in the new creation, there's no need for lamp or sun because Jesus is the light. Like our sun is a pathetic kind of grayscale version of the light that Jesus is. I mean, I don't know where that leaves these. You know, he is just glorious. And he brings light to people in darkness. And this is language that's used right throughout the Bible. Zechariah, I think, has pinched part of Psalm 107. We heard from Psalm 107 last week. We prayed through Psalm 107 on Wednesday of this week. And it's a psalm that describes people who are in all kinds of sinful pickles. And there's like a repeated pattern where people rebel against God, and God gives them over to experience the consequences of their actions. They cry out to God in their distress, and he rescues them. And this little chunk of Psalm 107 says, "Some sat in darkness, in utter darkness, prisoners suffering in iron chains because they rebelled against God's commands and despised the plans of the Most High. So he subjected them to bitter labor. They stumbled. There was no one to help. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble. He saved them from their distress. He brought them out of darkness, the utter darkness, and he burst their bonds apart." This isn't just like him tinkering with their bonds. This is like he burst their bonds apart. That's what the light does. He steps into the shadow of death and he bursts bonds apart. He's no fairy light. He is the sunrise. And I'm very aware, it feels like the last few months, but I think for some of you, over a period of years, protracted years, it doesn't always feel like that is the case. It feels like there's a heaviness and a grief and a sadness because of the circumstances of our lives, the things that are going on in the lives of those that we love. And it doesn't feel like the light pervades the darkness. It doesn't feel like he's bursting the bonds apart. And we feel the weightiness of the shadow of death. Bless you. I remember a number of years ago in a prayer meeting, Paul, you brought up the idea of object permanence. And an object permanence is where, when you've got a small baby, small babies, if they can't see it, it doesn't exist. You take it away from their view, and they can't see it. It's gone, as far as they're concerned. But then they get a little bit older, and as they get older, you start playing peekaboo with them, and they start looking for you. Oh, you are still real. Like, even though I can't see you anymore, I know you're real. And we need that same sense of object permanence when it comes to the light that Jesus is. Even when we can't see it, even when we can't feel it, we know that he is still real. Even on a day like today, the sun is still real. We can't see it, but we know that it exists, and we go looking for it, and we need that sense of object permanence. And you think about these miners, what was it that kind of sustained them? What was it that kept them going? The fact that they knew that the light still existed, they knew that there was life and light above ground, and they knew that there was someone coming to rescue them. They knew. And they knew because they knew the motivation of the hearts of the people that were looking for them. These family kept vigil for like 60 odd days, living in these tents, praying and crying, lamenting. Praying, crying, lamenting. Why did they do that? As they embraced their loved ones that were returned to them on that day, they wept with tears of relief and joy and suspended grief. Why? What was their motivation for waiting for their loved ones? It was precisely that. Love. Why is it that this rescuer is going to come? Why is it that he's going to break into the darkness to give knowledge of the salvation to his people in the forgiveness of their sins because of the tender mercy of our God? Now, that phrase, tender mercy, I think it misses something in English because it literally means moved to his guts. If God had intestines, he would be moved to them. The way that when somebody that we love is under threat. Last week, or 2 weeks ago, we had a phone call from school to say that one of our kids had been assaulted in school. And there's this kind of like, like an inner reaction of, and it's part kind of protection. And it's part like, oh my word, this one that I love is under threat. When one that we love is under threat or in danger, we are moved to our guts. Now, do we imagine that we are more compassionate than God? Do we imagine that our love for those that we love is greater than his love for those that he loves? It can't be. This is his gracious love. He owes us nothing, and yet he loves us with such overwhelming force and at such great cost. When those rescuers rode the capsule down, they knew that there was a very real risk that they could die. When Jesus came down, Jesus wasn't taking a risk on something uncertain. He knew that he would die. There was no risk involved. The sin that lies behind the darkness that we chose to live in must be eradicated if God is going to make all things new. And love itself, the light, comes down into the darkness and takes the darkness upon himself. He takes our place in the darkness and he takes our death upon himself. And then he obliterates death and sin and darkness from the inside. And he rises from the dead as king forever. More glorious, more glorious. And joined to him by faith, we are raised into light and life by love himself. Jesus has come to bring light to people in darkness and to bring the people in darkness into the light. This is what he's come to do. So what do we do with this? Well, all 33 miners were rescued. They cried out in their distress, and they were rescued. They were brought up into wide open spaces. They were washed clean. And this is such a kind of, it's such a pathetic picture, such an anemic picture of what Jesus does. If you're here this morning and maybe you've been hearing about Jesus a lot and yet you know that you've actually never left the hole. You've never come to a place of recognizing the predicament that you're in and recognizing that actually you can't dig yourself out and recognizing that the one who's come to rescue you is the King and he gives you life freely and he calls you to give your allegiance to him. Then you need to know this morning that the sunrise has come. The sunrise has come to visit you. He's come and he's demonstrated his love for you by living for you, dying for you, rising for you. And now even more extraordinarily, he sits at the right hand of the throne of God and he prays for you. Jesus prays for you. He's powerful to bring you out into the light and to wash you clean inside and out. And not only to bring you out into the light, but then to put his light in you by his Spirit. And his Spirit in us shines into all the dark places of shame that we never want to go back to, the guilt that we never want to talk about, the sadness that we wish we'd never experienced, the sin that we wish we'd never done, and the regret that kind of covers all of that. The Spirit shines into all of that, and he redeems it all. And he begins the work of transforming us back into the people that we were created to be. He brings us out into wide open spaces to show us what it means to live in the light of who Jesus is. To be transformed, to be part of what he's doing in the world now, and to be part of him making all things new in something that lasts forever. And so, if that's where you're at, like today is the day. We keep saying this, don't delay. None of us knows if we've got a tomorrow. But I'm also aware that for others who have given their lives to Jesus, two things that have been sitting on me particularly this week. First of all, the hole can be a place of comfort. That we can find ourselves going back to old habits, things that we used to do before we knew Jesus, and then we kind of find ourselves making bad choices and sliding back into those things. And the easiest thing for us to do is to hide, is to do what Adam and Eve did in the garden. I was naked, I was ashamed, so I hid. Don't hide. Don't hide this morning. The reality is that God already knows. And so, when we try and hide from God, it's the most useless game of hide and seek ever. He sees us everywhere that we are. And that isn't something to be threatened by, because his love rests on us. And he wants us to come out of the hole. Stop hiding in the hole. And confession isn't something that leads us to a place of false guilt. Confession is a place that leads us to freedom and life. But then the second thing is that, and this isn't even something that I know that this is the case. That for so many of you, you are experiencing life where it feels like the light that is in you and the light that Jesus is eclipsed by the darkness in the lives of those around you and in the lives of the situations that you are encountering. It feels like that darkness encroaches and robs you of hope and causes you deep sadness and grief. And that's all real. That's all real. And none of this diminishes any of that. But I want us to take a moment this morning to bring all of those things into the light. Caleb, can we end Facebook, please?